Hello and welcome to Wednesday in Parliament, our look at the best of the day in the Commons and the Lords. The Chancellor Philip Hammond warns the British economy is set to grow more slowly while government borrowing is rising, following Britain's decision to leave the EU.
This autumn statement responds to the challenge of building on that strength while also heeding the warnings in the OBR's figures as we begin writing this new chapter in our country's history.
The Shadow Chancellor says it's an opportunity wasted.
Today's statement places on record the abject failure of the last 6 wasted years.
Also on this programme, who cares most about care? The party leaders clash at PMQs.
This government's choice was to cut social care by £4.6 billion in the last Parliament.
13 years and they did nothing.
But first, it was just minutes before the Chancellor Philip Hammond stood up to deliver his autumn statement that news came through from the Old Bailey that 53-year-old Thomas Mair had been found guilty of the murder of Joe Cox. The Yorkshire Labour MP was shot and stabbed to death in a village in her constituency of Batley and Spen on the 16th of June, 1 week before the EU referendum. Thomas Mair had shouted "Britain first" in the attack. But the Old Bailey judge said the true patriot was Joe Cox, not Mair. There was reaction to the guilty verdict in the Commons.
Joe Cox's murder robbed this House of a fierce advocate for social justice and a passionate campaigner. Her killing was an attack on democracy itself. Our thoughts are with her family this morning.
I hope that the whole life sentence for Joe's murderer can at least give some comfort to her family at this incredibly difficult time, and will also enable us to remember Joe for the way that she lived rather than the way that she was murdered.
I associate myself with the remarks that she's just made, and I'm sure she's right, that the entirely sensible sentence that has been handed down will be a source of some comfort to the family.
Well, half an hour before the Old Bailey verdict was announced, the Chancellor had departed from number 11 Downing Street and made the familiar but short distance by shiny car to the House of Commons. It was Philip Hammond's first autumn statement, and as he made clear later, it turned out to be the last Commons occasion to be so named. After days of speculation, interest was considerable in what the Chancellor might be about to deliver. But before announcing any new measures, Mr Hammond started by saying he was proud to be reporting on an economy which the International Monetary Fund had predicted would be the fastest growing in the world this year.
An economy which, through the hard work of the British people, has bounced back from the depths of Labour's recession. And an economy which has confounded commentators at home and abroad with its strength and its resilience since the British people decided exactly 5 months ago today to leave the European Union and chart a new future for our country. Mr Speaker, that decision will change the course of Britain's history. It has thrown into sharp relief the fundamental strengths of the British economy that will ensure our future success.
Then on to forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Today's OBR forecast is for growth to be 2.1% in 2016, higher than forecast in March. In 2017, the OBR forecast growth to slow to 1.4%, which they attribute to lower investment and weaker consumer demand, driven respectively by greater uncertainty and by higher inflation resulting from sterling depreciation. That is slower, of course, than we would wish. Mr Speaker, it is customary in the run-up to the autumn statement to hear representations from the Shadow Chancellor of the day, usually for untenable levels of spending and borrowing. We used to think on this side of the House that Ed Ball's demands were an extreme example, but I have to say the current Shadow Chancellor has outperformed him in the fiscal incontinence sweepstake, Mr Speaker. What we don't know, of course, is whether he can also dance. I have received some... He can. Good. Good.
The Chancellor said UK productivity had to be improved.
I can announce that we are forming a new National Productivity Investment Fund of £23 billion to be spent on innovation and infrastructure over the next 5 years.
On to housing.
So we will focus government infrastructure investment to unlock land for housing, with a new £2.3 billion housing infrastructure fund to deliver infrastructure for up to 100,000 new homes in areas of high demand. And to provide affordable housing that supports a wide range of need, we will invest a further £1.4 billion to deliver 40,000 additional affordable homes.
Help for the lowly paid.
So today I can announce that the national living wage will increase from £7.20 to £7.50 in April next year. That's a pay rise worth over £500 a year to a full-time worker. I can also confirm today that, having consulted further, my right honourable friend the Communities Secretary will lower the transitional relief cap from 45% next year to 43% and from 50% to 32% the year after. That's complicated, but it's good news. Mr. Speaker, our future transport, business and lifestyle needs will require world-class digital infrastructure to underpin them. So my ambition is for... Yeah, it says here because I wrote it here.
Then came the surprise of the day.
This is my first autumn statement as Chancellor. After careful consideration and detailed discussion with the Prime Minister, I have decided that it will also be my last. Mr. Speaker, I am abolishing the autumn statement. No other major economy makes hundreds of tax changes twice a year, and neither should we. So the spring budget in a few months will be the final spring budget. Starting in autumn 2017, Britain will have an autumn budget announcing tax changes well in advance of the start of the tax year. From 2018, there will be a spring statement responding to the forecast.
And so to Mr. Hammond's finale.
We are a great nation, bold in our vision, confident in our strengths, and determined in our ambition to build a country that works for everyone. I commend this statement.
Well, unlike the budget, the autumn statement is replied to not by the Leader of the Opposition, but by the Shadow Chancellor. John McDonnell had caused some entertainment in the chamber a year ago when he brought to the dispatch box a copy of Chairman Mao's Little Red Book and quoted from it. No such unusual events this year. Mr. McDonnell said the time since Labour left power in 2010 had been 6 wasted years.
Mr. Speaker, today's statement places on record the abject failure of the last 6 wasted years and offers no hope for the future. The figures speak for themselves. Growth down. Wage growth down. Business investment down. And the deficit and their own deficit target failed. The debt target failed. The so-called long-term economic plan has failed. And as the Treasury's own leaked paper revealed, the government knew it had failed before the referendum result was announced. And we now face Brexit, the greatest economic challenge of a generation, and we face it unprepared and ill-equipped. Today we've seen the very people the Prime Minister promised to champion betrayed. The Chancellor has failed to break with the economic strategy of austerity. The country remains unprepared and ill-equipped to meet the challenges of Brexit and secure Britain's future as a world-leading economy. After all the sacrifices people have made over the last 6 years, I fear today's statement has laid the foundations for more wasted years.
Then came the response from the SNP benches.
The Chancellor did give us plenty of information today, but with no more than a kind of glib reference to being match fit at the beginning and a bit of deflection. Very little, actually, on the elephant in the room, which is Brexit. And it's not as if the Treasury don't know what the consequences will be. Their own assessment tells us that tax yield could be down 66 billion a year after 15 years, GDP down perhaps 9.5%, a figure confirmed by the LSE as a result of reduced trade, reducing productivity. That amounts to some £6,500 per year per household.
And plenty of questions from backbench MPs on both sides of the House.
May I congratulate the Chancellor on reverting to the extremely sensible practice of only having one budget a year, which Gordon Brown abandoned in order to try to buy votes twice a year with disastrous consequences.
The OBR tells us on page 19, Mr. Speaker, that £58 billion of the worsening in the public finances is due to the Brexit decision. Isn't this a salutary warning to us about the decisions we take in the coming months and years? And isn't it a very strong argument for us remaining as close as possible to our largest trading area, the single market, and inside, not outside, the customs union?
The Chancellor's autumn statement suggests yet more public borrowing, with total public debt due to increase to £1.6 trillion in the new year and £1.9 trillion by 2020, 4 times what it was in 2005. Rather than a reflection on Brexit, is the accumulation of these unsustainable levels of public debt not due to the failure of his predecessor to match his words with deeds and get a grip on public spending?
Disappointingly, this Chancellor has joined his predecessor in failing to mention the words climate change even just once anywhere in this statement. That's in the year that is the hottest on record, set to be the hottest on record, and when parts of the country are under flood water.
The elevation of the condition of working people has always been a priority of the Conservative Party, and in that vein I particularly welcome the fiscal changes in the autumn statement, particularly fuel duty, tax allowances and the national living wage, which I campaigned for many years.
There is actually not one single mention in the 72-page autumn statement document of the words NHS, social care, mental health and public health.
Unbelievable.
The Chancellor cannot ignore the fact that our health and social care services are in crisis, facing massive, massive deficits.
The north of England is crying out for a plan for investment in rail, and people will be left asking today, where is it? But it is also crying out for investment in social care. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, it is unbelievable that the Chancellor could find no mention for it today.
An awful lot of R&D money funding is going to help my constituency. The scientific businesses I have in South Cambs have been worried since Brexit, so thank you for that. East-West rail links and road links will help us to spread that prosperity. But overall, for the money in universal credit, I know it was a very difficult decision. It's not everything we wanted, but I very much welcome the money that you've put aside for it. Thank you.
The last word in the Commons on the autumn statement. You're watching our roundup of the day at Westminster. Still to come, could Sir Philip Green's yachts be sold to fill the black hole in the BHS pension fund? Now, normally the centre stage act in Parliament on Wednesdays is Prime Minister's Questions. This time it had to take second billing. So, before the autumn statement got underway, the Labour leader decided to make social care for the elderly and vulnerable the key issue at PMQs. Jeremy Corbyn accused Theresa May of failing to fund adequately both the National Health Service and also social care budgets in England. The Prime Minister told him that Labour governments had failed to come up with a suitable plan to deal with the rapidly expanding demands placed on care services.
Part of the reason for the strain on our National Health Service is that more than 1 million people are not receiving the social care that they need. As a result of this, there's been an increase in emergency admissions for older patients. Margaret wrote to me this week saying, "It's not funny." She described how her 89-year-old mother suffered 2 falls leading to hospital admissions due to the lack of nursing care, and went on to say, "My mother is worth more than this." What action will the Prime Minister take to stop the neglect of older people, which ends up in forcing them to take A&E admissions when they should be cared for at home or in a care home?
Well, we've introduced the Better Care Fund and the Social Care Precept. Let's just look at what Labour did in their 13 years. They said they'd deal with social care in the 97 manifesto, introduced a Royal Commission in 1999, a Green Paper in 2005, the Oneness Review in 2006, said they'd sorted in the CSR of 2007, and another Green Paper in 2009. 13 years and they did nothing.
Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister well knows, health spending trebled under the last Labour government. And the levels of satisfaction with the National Health Service were at their highest ever in 2010. This government's choice was to cut social care by £4.6 billion in the last Parliament, at the same time as they found the space, shall we say, to cut billions in corporate taxation bills. The whole House, I'm sure, would have been appalled by the revelations in BBC Panorama programme this week, showing older people systematically mistreated. The Care Quality Commission's assessment that care homes run by the Morley Group require improvement and has issued warning notices. The Commission goes on to say that the owner has allowed services to deteriorate further and has, and I quote, utterly neglected the duty of care to the residents of these homes. What action is her government going to take to protect the residents of those homes?
What we do about it is ensure that we have the CQC, which is able to step in, which takes action, which has powers to make sure that nobody in the chain of responsibility is immune from legal accountability. But we know that there's more that can be done, and that's why the CQC is looking into ways in which it can improve its processes, increase its efficiency.
The Scottish National Party focused on disability benefits.
It's widely trailed that the Prime Minister will make changes impacting on benefit recipients in work. Will the Prime Minister confirm that she has no intention of helping people with disabilities and medical conditions? Why should people who are unable to earn a living be punished for their disability or illness by losing £30 a week? Does she have any intention of changing that?
The overall funding for spending on disability benefits will be higher in every year to 2020 than it was in 2010. But it is also important to recognise that when we give support for people with disabilities, it isn't simply about the benefit system and how much money they're given. For those in the workers, those who are able to get into work, and on that part of the ESA, we provide packages which are outside of the benefits as well, because we recognise that people want the dignity of getting into the workplace. That's what we are helping people with disabilities who can work to do.
Earlier this week, Boris Johnson was accused of being provocative and arrogant after apparently telling politicians in Turkey that he supports their country's bid to join the EU. The leading German member of the European Parliament, Manfred Weber, called the Foreign Secretary's comments unbelievable, given his warnings about Turkish migrants during the referendum campaign in Britain. The German MEP said, "I can't respect him anymore." At PMQs, a Labour backbencher seized on the words of the German politician.
The Brexit Secretary and the Foreign Secretary are described by a senior German politician as having no idea what Brexit really means. The Times reports today that EU ambassadors think the Foreign Secretary's more colourful outbursts are damaging our relationship with Member States. When is the Prime Minister going to get a grip on her ministers? And when is she going to demonstrate to the country and to our EU colleagues that she has a coherent, workable plan for Brexit?
I've been very clear in this House on many occasions about the plan that we have for Brexit. Crucially, we will be leaving the European Union and we will be triggering Article 50 by the end of March next year, and that's when the formal negotiations will start.
As millions of public sector workers face another year of suppressed pay, after another week of shambolic Brexit negotiations, and with the National Health Service facing a winter crisis and crying out for cash, does the Prime Minister worry that her government is only just about managing?
What the Right Honourable Gentleman wants to do is to stop us from leaving the European Union by denying the people the decision and the deliverability of the vote that they took rightly on the 23rd of June. He wants to deny people what they want. We're going to give it to them.
Earlier this year, the Lib Dem MP and former Minister Norman Lamb put forward a proposal to ban the use of taser guns by police officers when dealing with incidents in mental health units. On that occasion, the Commons voted down the proposal. But there's been a long-standing campaign from human rights activists for an end to the use of tasers, sometimes called electroshock weapons, on patients in psychiatric hospitals. When a Lib Dem peer raised the issue at Lord's Question Time, this was the reply of a Home Office minister.
My Lords, there is ongoing work to ensure that any operational police decisions on the use of force in a mental health setting are necessary and proportionate. This includes development of a new protocol on police attendance, national collection from 2017 to 18 of police data on any force used, and a request to local areas to scrutinise the use of any taser in a mental health setting.
I thank the Minister for that response, but she will know that a recent Independent Police Complaints Commission report has stated that people suffering from mental illness are 4 times more likely to die after police use of force against them than other individuals. Will the government look at the possibility that better training for police officers in how to deal with people suffering from mental health illness might alleviate the need for them ever to use tasers, because they might understand better how to deal with the situation?
It cannot be the position that police officers are called in to mental health units, actually into the units, unless there has been a major failure of care by the health service. This is blaming the people who are clearing up the mess rather than dealing with the problem itself.
Well, my Lords, I think that Noble Lord and I agree on one level, because if somebody has got a mental health problem or is experiencing a mental health crisis, it is a health issue. However, if somebody experiences behaviour that is both a danger to themselves and or to others, including staff within these mental health settings, then there may be no other option. Of course, these situations are rare, but there may be no other option than for police restraint to be used.
Lady Williams. 7 months ago came news that British home stores had collapsed, with debts of more than £1.25 billion. In October, MPs took the unusual step to vote for a removal of the knighthood given to the shop's former owner, the businessman Sir Philip Green. Since then, there's been speculation that Sir Philip might have something else taken away, namely his yachts. Sir Philip's been pictured more than once, apparently enjoying life on board in various Mediterranean locations. But could the yachts be used to fill the large deficit in the BHS pension fund? A question for the Work and Pensions Committee.
First of all, I would like to assure the BHS pension scheme members that we are pursuing the best possible outcome that we can secure for them relentlessly. And to that end, as you know, on the 2nd of November we issued a warning notice giving indication of our intention to attempt to use our powers against various targets. The committee will understand that I'm reluctant to discuss the precise terms of settlement offers and so on. However, what I can say is that typically in these situations, it isn't as simple. If it was as simple as a cheque being written, then we'd all, I'm sure, be happy that that would, if it was for the right sum, would be a very good outcome for the members.
That could be the outcome, though, Leslie, couldn't it?
It is one of the options that is still there, absolutely right. However, if the offer takes a more complex form in some way, then we have to not just be satisfied that the monetary amounts are correct, but also to ensure a good outcome for the members, that there isn't any residual risk.
And my last question, partly because the public have been lobbying me over, because they're so obsessed, rightly so, about his ostentatious display of wealth with his boats. That might be for the courts to decide whether they have to be sold, rather than you, Leslie, is that right?
That's correct.
And that's where we tie up our boat for now, but do join me for our next daily roundup from Westminster. Until then, from me, Keith McDougall, goodbye.